Thank you for coming today. My name's Anthony Trochtchenkov. I work with GlattHealth Consulting Group. I oversee business brokerage services and handle mergers and acquisitions. We're here to discuss acquisitions as a whole. One of the reasons why I kind of wanted to gather everybody today and bring this panel together was to kind of give a little bit more insight into the acquisition process and how some companies are looking at valuations. I think something that's kind of common theme right now in the M&A industry is that there's a bit of a valuation gap between what buyers are willing to pay for their companies and what sellers kind of actually want to get in return as a value. There's a little bit of kind of a lore that exists around some of the bigger deals that happen, and I think people that are interested in coming to the market, they're using these other deals as kind of a template in terms of how to base a valuation. That's kind of not the reality on how these valuations work. So I want to give a little bit more insight today in terms of how the acquisition process flows, certain things that you guys can do to make yourselves a more ideal target, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to pass off the baton with our first question with Matt. If you want to start, introduce yourself, and then I'll start off with the first question.
Sure. Is this on?
Yeah.
First of all, pleasure to be here. Thank you to the GlattHealth and all the hosts and the venue for having us. It's a real pleasure. My name is Matt Turner. For those that haven't met, I work for a company called Homecare. We are the largest non-medical home care provider in the country. My role there is Vice President of Corporate Development, mergers and acquisitions. A little bit about Help at Home. We've been around for about 45 years. We're in 13 states. We provide care to 65,000 plus individuals on an annual basis. We employ about 50,000 caregivers. We recently entered the New York market, which we're thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be able to provide services to great people in New York, and we feel like we've got a really good platform how to build it out and continue to grow. Most of what we do outside of New York is what you all refer to as legacy services, so traditional non-medical home care. We have a couple of markets where we are focused on consumer-directed services, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, within New York, our footprint is Alpha-based and Peretz and McCarthy.
Thank you. Actually, before we jump into the question, why don't we just introduce the rest of the panelists? Ryan, if you want to just give a brief introduction on yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ryan McCarthy. I'm a director in the Healthcare Transaction Advisory Practice at BRG. For those that aren't familiar with BRG, we often jokingly refer to our firm as the largest multinational consulting firm that no one's ever heard of. We're only about 11 or 12 years old. 1,500 professionals with, call it $600-700 million in revenue. But I specifically work within the corporate finance portion of our firm. And have spent more or less the last 6 years building the sixth largest healthcare focused diligence provider and advisory services firm in the country. So we've got about 50 professionals located across the country. Most of us are based in Nashville. So looking forward to be here. I've had the pleasure of sitting on the same side of the table and across the table from Matt and the Help at Home folks, specifically here in the New York market, and look forward to the event, and I appreciate the sponsors that's put it on.
Thank you, Ryan. And last but not least, Peretz, if you want to just give a little intro on yourself.
Thank you. It's an honor to share the stage with Matt and Ryan. My name is Peretz Rapoport, Director of Product at Empeon, powerful payroll and HR solutions for the home care space. Let me first say that this is an amazing event, and a big hat tip to GlattHealth and Power Productions for putting this together. And thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. I think Matt and Ryan will say this louder than me. When evaluating an agency for M&A, a key measure is an accurate, transparent, and compliant payroll. It keeps the profit margins healthy, protects from unwanted liabilities, and is conducive for healthy caregiver retention. And at Empeon, we live this. And that's why we've been trusted close to 15 years by leaders in the home care space. And we're fortunate and blessed to be processing well over 5 million checks annually just in the home care space. Thank you.
Thank you, Peretz. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to just jump into the questions here, starting off with Matt. Matt, can you share some details in terms of the types of deals that you guys pursue at Help at Home?
Sure. So we have a long and kind of deep track record of doing acquisitions across a number of different markets. As I mentioned, we're in 13 states today. We've been active from the M&A side. I hate the sound of my own voice, so maybe it's a little bit of something for me trying to get it out of my ears. I'll try to speak up. So we've been active from an M&A standpoint in all of those markets for a long time. In the last few years, we've done over 20 M&A transactions across all the states that we're in. I'm very excited to continue down that path. We see M&A as a really effective way to continue to drive value for our stakeholders, make sure that we're providing care to as many folks as we can, it's high quality, and ultimately driving down the cost of healthcare broadly. In terms of what we're trying to do from an acquisition standpoint, we're really interested in building scale and depth in the markets that we're in. And we think about acquisitions in kind of two veins. One is platform acquisitions, which are typically larger. Typically we think about those as getting into a new market or expanding our capabilities significantly. We also think about tuck-in or bolt-on acquisitions, which tend to be a little bit smaller in scale. We're usually pulling them into an existing footprint that we have. Typically that's within a market that we've already got a presence. And it gives us the chance to really build that scale and that density. We have no preference around size of acquisitions. We've done acquisitions that run the full spectrum from $1 million of revenue up to deals that are much, much larger than that. For us, it's all about how do we bring, again, that scale, that density, and bring value to our stakeholders as we look to build our business across these markets. So certainly from our standpoint, we view M&A as a really key tool for us to continue to grow. And expect that we'll continue down that path.
Thank you for that. Ryan, kind of just piggybacking off of that, would you be able to just share some details in terms of the deals that you support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start. From my lens, we kind of have two broad categories. So you have sort of the buy-side transactions where we're supporting a buyer in diligencing a business, and then there's the sell side. So speaking to what Matt was just looking at from the buy side, there's generally two types of deals that we're essentially supporting him or other clients of ours are looking at. One of those are, again, the platform transactions versus the tuck-ins. And really, I think from our lens, there's a little bit more of a merger integration component to the tuck-in transaction. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we're trying to assess risk. And each one of those types of transactions poses different types of risk to a buyer that we're ultimately hoping to support, whether it's through quality of earnings, which is essentially the financial diligence, compliance, IT. Again, on the $1 million revenue company, probably not doing the full suite. On the much, much larger deals, that those number of work streams expand pretty meaningfully. The other category of transactions that might be a little bit more appealing to some of the folks in the audience are the sell side transactions where we're supporting a seller. And I would categorize those from our lens into similarly two categories. One is sort of just get the QB and the financials done, get us some numbers to work with. But what we really like to do at BRG is serve as an advisor, not a rubber stamp QB firm. We're really helping a seller get ready to go to market. And that is a lot of non-financial work that doesn't necessarily manifest itself immediately in the numbers. But when someone like Matt is looking under the hood, those things become very apparent very quickly as the process starts to evolve in terms of how ready a company is to go through a diligence process.
Thank you for that. Matt, when considering an acquisition, can you just give us some details in terms of what are the key considerations in terms of what makes an ideal target and what impacts value?
Sure. This is sort of a loaded question in that there's a ton of things that impact value. I think you all probably know that and can appreciate that. When we think about, again, kind of in the two buckets, right? Platform versus a tuck-in. There's very different value drivers within those buckets. So if you're of scale and could represent an opportunity for someone to come in new and really build around, the value that's attributed there is very different than if you're a player that may have some size, but you're in an existing market that is kind of being rolled up around. So there's considerations on those points. I think the things that are most important to me and to all the owners, we look at these acquisitions, more from the lens of the tuck-ins is, first of all, if I have a business that's in the same market, it's got to be a fit with that business. There's got to be a natural opportunity to bring those two companies together. The target that we're looking at has to be high quality. And when I say high quality, that runs across the spectrum. So I think about financially, operationally, in terms of compliance, in terms of their recruiting approach, their marketing, all these aspects. We are looking for high quality assets to add to our book. I think it's key for us that that's there across the board. And then there's always a question about, does this opportunity present a chance to scale beyond what I'm currently able to do, expand my footprint beyond where it's currently at? Are there capabilities that this target has and could bring to the table for us more broadly? Again, oftentimes that sits more with a platform, but it can be a consideration for a tuck-in as well. So there's a ton of factors, there's a ton that goes into it. It's not I wish I could come up here and give a clean-cut, cookie-cutter answer about what drives value. You've obviously got to have a strong financial performance and the numbers have to be there. But there's so many other qualitative factors that go into this, and I think the more as sellers think about holistically, what does their book look like, what does their business look like, how do they operate themselves, the value will prove itself out.
I actually wanted to ask you about that. In terms of the qualitative factors, how important is that in terms of increasing the value versus just having the financials alone? Like if a company is bringing a high value in that area, how is that going to impact the value, the bottom line?
Yeah, it can be significant. I think it's important that people understand. Again, we're in the business. We know the way that these businesses can be run, should be run, and sometimes how they are run. And I think it's really important that people don't get the financials are important. Ultimately, I've got investors and I've got folks that I've got to be able to prove value to, and the financials are a key piece of that. But if there's significant compliance risks, if there are concentration with one payer versus having a nice balanced book of payers, things that introduce risk to the acquisition, that can pull down value. At the same time, a business that maybe has less on the financial side, that is well run, well balanced, has a strong compliance program, everything that goes into that, they might be able to drive a little bit of a higher valuation in terms of that.
Thank you for that answer. Ryan, this question is for you. Is it true to say that a company with more patience is worth more?
It's an interesting question. I think it piggybacks on a lot of what Matt said as far as value. Our clients is just another layer, almost beneath the financial performance at times. I think a lot of folks in the room know that not every client is equal. Different clients have, again, different payer concentrations or risks. Looking at the New York market in particular, is it a LIXA contract? Is it CDPAP? Is it a little bit of private pay? Depending on the percentage makeup of that client mix, a company with less clients but a better, call it, contract mix can certainly fetch a better price in the eyes of our clients. Or when I'm supporting a company going to market and getting ready to go to market, it's something you certainly want to be very aware of. Know your census, know your hours, how those things are trending. So I think another piece of it oftentimes can get lost is sort of a concept of run rate performance. If you've got recent changes in your client portfolio, around the time you're going to market, that can be something that maybe changes the picture of a business and a buyer's view on that business. So certainly it's a component of driving value, but again, there's a lot of qualitative measures behind that, which requires data. Not to kick it to Peretz, but Peretz, it's if you don't have the information to even support your client mix, that's an entirely different sort of problem, regardless of how good or bad it is. Again, it's very qualitative, but it certainly has a direct connection to value.
Thank you. I think that was an important question to ask because, especially within our market, I think there's a certain way of looking at valuations, at least as it has been over the last few years. We have X amount of patients, average patient value is quote unquote this much, and everybody's just trying to drive up numbers and they're looking at valuations from that standpoint. But it can come out in terms of an end result that a smaller company can actually be worth more than a larger company because of these other qualitative factors. Peretz, kicking off with you now, what role does compliance with payroll and related Department of Labor regulations play in the acquisition process? And in general, what are the potential liabilities if a company isn't calculating this properly?
Okay, I want to first underscore, you guys know this better than me, that DOL compliance can make it or break it for an agency financially. There's so many examples of agencies who thought that they were in compliance just to be served by an eager lawyer who found one of their employees who was paid wrong, misunderstanding, miscalculation. Not long ago we had an agency contact us. They were in a huge hole due to miscalculations and wage parity and overtime, and we were able to help them, thank God, with backdated calculations, payouts. We had multiple agencies who contact us, and you guys know this very well, with potential ACA penalties in the millions. So the liabilities can be great, which I think compliant payroll is so important when evaluating an agency for M&A. Now, if I may add, yes, as an agency, of course, you want to be compliant. And of course, it is a huge financial burden. However, if done right, there are ways on how to reduce and offset some of that cost. Let's take, for example, the New York spread of hours. Right, in New York, if a caregiver from the first clock in of the day to the last clock out of the day, there's a spread of more than 10 hours, you're smiling, you're required to pay them an extra hour of pay. Now, at the same time, you can take advantage of any pay above minimum wage that you're giving the caregiver, such as shift differentials, holiday premiums, in some cases bonuses, to offset that cost, or at least reduce it. And the same with wage parity, right? If done right, there are ways on how to offset and reduce that cost. So I think that's another important point when evaluating an agency for M&A. How are they managing to maximize on the profit margins while staying compliant? If I may say, this can also be an opportunity, correct me if I'm wrong, when you are evaluating an agency and you see that the profit margins are thin, and you dig into payroll and you see that they did not implement best payroll practice, like the examples we just saw, you might have struck gold, because now by fixing that, you can increase drastically the profit margins.
Thank you for that detailed answer. Kicking back to Matt, can you please give us an overview of the acquisition process, at least that you guys take on at Help at Home, and kind of your involvement in that?
Sure. So first of all, we try to be efficient with our process, and that always gets a little bit of a chuckle from the crowd, because if anyone's been through it, there's a lot of work that goes in. But we really do strive to be efficient in that process. We understand that folks who are looking to sell their business have a business to run, while they're also trying to be responsive to diligence and provide the information that we need in order to run through our process. But with that said, our typical process is that we will start having conversations with a potential target, sign a non-disclosure agreement so that we're operating under confidentiality. We will start to gather some preliminary information about the business that allows us to get to a view on value. As we've talked about here, that's not just financial information. There's also information about client census and hours and caregiver hiring and aspects that drive business beyond just the output of the business, which is the numbers. And we spend a good deal of time trying to make sure we really understand the business, because again, going back to what makes an acquisition attractive for us, it's got to be a fit with our current business, and it has to be high quality. And so we really do spend energy up front making sure that's the case. It was alluded to, for us, the financial metric that we focus on is EBITDA, earning before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. I'll let Ryan get into all the fun details of how you calculate that. But it's more than just a metric times a number gets you a price, right? We're a private equity-backed, privately held business. We're measured on EBITDA. EBITDA is what ultimately gets contributed to us through these acquisitions. So there's a lot of energy that goes in as we work to develop that view on value. If we all agree that there's a deal to be done and we have alignment around value, we'll sign an LOI, and that's when we kick off our confirmatory diligence process. What we're trying to do in that stage is review in more detail what we understand the business to look like, confirm that that's the case, and our goal, and we close the vast majority of the LOIs that we sign. Our goal is that the value that we've put on paper as part of the LOI process, assuming that we learn nothing to the contrary in our diligence, that's a deal that we're willing to do at that price. I think you'll find sometimes people have different strategies on negotiating LOIs and purchase price. They'll put something on the page and then try to redact it from there forward. We don't take that approach. For me, it's very important. That initial value is where we hope to land when we come out of diligence. Our diligence process will involve folks like Ryan, who will step in and support us in the financial capacity. We have other advisors. We have an internal team that will support that process. And to Peretz's point, what I see most is people who are successful in diligence are people who have access to the data that's being asked of them. It's accurate. They don't have to go back and kind of regenerate it multiple times and say, oh, I'm sorry. Systems can be finicky. Sometimes things get run the wrong way. That's fine. But ultimately, having good, sound data is really going to allow you to get through that confirmatory process smoothly. And then ultimately, from there, we would look to move to sign and close. Which is the part everybody gets excited about. But there's a lot of energy that goes into the process. We take it very seriously. And for us, it's very important throughout that we're always trying to make sure that we understand the business, understand the fit, understand the quality of the pieces that we talked about.
Thank you for that answer. And one of the things we do at GlattHealth, we handhold clients through this entire process. We look for any potential obstacles that may come about, and we create strategies for them. And we also just ultimately look to negotiate a better outcome. And oftentimes, when working with a broker, you can definitely get a better outcome than just by approaching the buyer yourself.
Anthony, if I could just add to that, I think one of the ways that there is value there absolutely is if you're going at this alone, and we'll talk about brokers later in the agenda, so I'm going to cut ahead. But when you're going at this alone, if you're not familiar with the M&A process, it can feel overwhelming. I think we, in particular, really do emphasize trying to do more work up front to save some of the heartburn on the back end. I think you'll find others who will move very fast, and then you'll notice deals are slow to get done, or they start to fall apart, or they get shaky at the end, and that's because they haven't probably done enough work in the front part of the deal to really understand what they're looking at, and then it becomes a bit of a retrade later in the process. We try to avoid that as much as we can. I'm sure, Anthony, from your lens, you guys try to shepherd people through that process to avoid some of that.
I think people sometimes rush to get to that bottom line number, and I think the most important aspect is allowing, especially with a strong buyer team, do that solid due diligence process at the very beginning, and it really creates a more seamless process moving throughout it. The speed of the deal is considerably different. You don't have to go back for information, so on and so forth. So that initial due diligence process is very important. Kicking off the next question, Ryan, what should a seller expect during the confirmatory diligence process, and how can a seller prepare for that diligence?
Yeah, so I think I'll touch on the second part of that question first, because I think we just hit on some of it. One of the important parts of kind of navigating this process well is having people in your corner who have done it, and who have not just done broadly M&A. There's a lot of people who have done deals, but are familiar with your business and in the geography. Here in New York, there's a lot of nuances. We talked about some of them, wage parity, things that are changing outside the four walls of the business, with the lead by ARFO, with the minimum wage change, about 2 months ago that went into effect. Those are things that change, the numbers and can change some of the operations. And if you don't have someone that kind of knows what those things are that aren't just happening in the four walls, it can stall a deal that's going through confirmatory diligence. It can cause all kinds of problems. Time's the enemy, ultimately, in these processes, and practice makes perfect. So I think something, somewhat self-serving, but getting an advisor in your corner who can kind of walk you through and do the dress rehearsal, show you where the skeletons are before a buyer finds them, quite frankly, if there are any, and then work to improve those things. Because you don't have to necessarily go rush to market. You can take your time once you've found those items, if they're meaningful enough, and pretty things up, get the processes in place to where you can actually go harness value. And we were talking earlier about the qualitative aspects. This is more what I'm referencing than just the financial performance. It's the optics of how does this thing look, how does it run, what does someone who is an operator like Matt think when they've seen how a good machine runs, how does your machine compare? I think that's really, really critical to take the time to think through that before you rush out to market alone or with an advisor who's ill prepared for what's ahead.
Yeah, that cleanup process and that component right there is usually where we run into issues in any deal. Aside from like relational components, people dealing with people, sometimes that's also a hurdle in dealing with a particular deal. But aside from that, it's dealing with the skeletons in the closet and doing the proper cleanup, and that will considerably change the value on your business. Peretz, coming back to you. So can you share some of the features Empeon offers that can assist during the due diligence phase?
Yes, sure, multiple components. One of the beauties of what we do when working with home care agencies, we try to capture as much relevant visit information as possible from the EMR and pass it to payroll. Per visit, this can be the clock in, the clock out, the patient, the contract, the visit location. And by passing this to payroll, now you have powerful data. Because now you can run detailed payroll cost reports and slice and dice the data however you want and make informative decisions. And this is also how we are able to provide our clients, our home care agency clients, with detailed general ledger files that contain visit information, which then you can make a comparison, bill versus pay. If I may sidetrack for one moment, by passing the visit information from the EMR to payroll, that also allows our application to perform the complex payroll calculations, the wage parities, the split shifts, and also to run audits, such as flagging, for example, if you're trying to pay now an aid for a visit that you have already paid her for before. Back to the question. Another important point is, and Matt mentioned this, data quality and the ease of getting the data. One of the things we do at Empeon, we put a lot of emphasis on the end user experience. Within a few clicks of a button, you can get detailed payroll cost reports. The data belongs to the agencies. And we at Empeon, we try to make it as easy as possible for the agencies to access the data. So I think that's another important point. Last point I would say is payroll calculation transparency. If you're looking at an agency, evaluating an agency, and you want to take a deeper dive, how are they calculating wage parity, for example? In Empeon, it's not just another back-end calculation that spits out the totals for you. You can actually see the full breakdown from the liabilities, the offsets, the benefits, and I think that's very powerful.
Thank you for that answer. Coming back to Ryan, you're talking about some of these issues before, but what are some issues that might arise during the deal process, and what's the potential impact?
Yeah, I mean, how much time do we have, Anthony? Would be my first question, but I'll try and keep it short.
We did get like a 5-minute warning, but let's try to give these guys the value.
I mean, coming from the accountant and finance guy's lens, having good data, I've seen a lot of on the spectrum of quality of data. I've seen the box full of receipts, and I've seen information that comes out of Empeon, and that sort of data quality significantly makes our job easier, communicating results easier to whoever my client is, whether it's the seller, whether it's the buyer. it makes a dramatic impact. Again, time's the enemy. How quickly can you get to something when you can click a button and you have an advisor, not just a vendor, partnering with you in that way? It's great. Again, very, very passionate about that, just as far as how much that can improve the process. But I think something else, I mentioned optics earlier. Matt's mentioned kind of qualitative considerations on the management team, how a business is run. There can be meaningful deal issues associated with how a company, from a process perspective, is running a business. We've had several clients of ours over the years who have had great businesses financially, phenomenal. And we said, look, take 10 to 12 months. The way that someone who's operating a platform already and you would be a tuck-in, like this isn't gonna go the way you want it to. Don't argue for EBITDA credit on one adjustment. Worry about the number of turns you're gonna get based on how well or how poorly this business is being operated. Like that's where it's easy to focus on the onesie twosies. It's those bigger pictures that are the real value drivers and creators. That if you have the discipline and the patience to go about addressing those, makes a big difference in the transaction process through a variety of ways. I think the only other item I'd add, and I already mentioned it a little bit, is just those changes outside the four walls of the business. Just know what's going on in the industry, in the New York market specifically. This is a fascinating, Homecare is a fascinating business in New York, given the amount of changes and complexity. It can make and break how familiar you are with those things.
So if I can layer in, Ryan's the accountant in the room, and he's a darn good one at that. I'm a recovering CPA myself, so I can say this. It's maybe on the finance side, I have a little bit more of the optimistic view as opposed to the negative view. We're talking about issues, right? So I think it's important. All the things that you mentioned are relevant, and they happen, and they are prevalent in the deal process. I think it's also important to know that this can be a really great path, right? There is value in what you're building. There is value in services that you're providing. There are folks like Empeon, like us, who would look to add to our book through acquisition. So I think it's easy to look at the issues and get a little bit squirrely about what does this process look like and is this overwhelming. I think there's a couple things you can do. One is, to all of Ryan's points, know your business, know the market. Folks who are not familiar with New York, it's a little bit of a different beast compared to other markets, especially on the Medicaid side. And getting the right support. And we'll talk about this again a little bit, but have good systems that produce good data. Get good advisors. I'll pick on CPAs. I'll pick on lawyers. The lawyer that writes your will might not be the right deal counsel for you. So I think just as you go through this process, know that there are issues, but also know that this can be a really great exit opportunity and a way to monetize value in something that you've built. But be eyes wide open on what the risks are and manage those up front.
Thank you for that detailed answer, guys. Kicking it back off to you, Matt, though. What benefits have you seen in using a broker to negotiate and work out some of these issues that we're discussing here?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with what I perceive to be the biggest issues that I face as a buyer with sellers. All things we've talked about. One is inability to get the information that I need to be able to do the assessment that I'm trying to do to get you the value that you're looking for and be able to have that conversation. If I can't get the information that I need, it's very difficult to get the ball moving. So that's kind of issue number one. And issue number two is that for a lot of folks, they know the industry really well, they know their business really well. They don't know the M&A process likely at all. And I think having resources available to you who can help support you through that process can be really helpful, because like anything, if you're doing it for the first time, things that may be very normal course may feel confusing or like it's, maybe it feels like a negotiation tactic or something where it's just very normal course process. And the third point is something that we hit on at the start, which is I do think sellers have more often than not very unrealistic expectations around value. That's not to say that companies don't have the appropriate value within the market they're in, but I think it's easy to look at other deals that are happening. There's some public companies that do a lot of the same services that you all do. There's other ways that people come up with what they think value is, and I think having a realistic expectation of that can be a real hurdle for the buyer. So, to your question about how can brokers help, I think having advisors that are working alongside you that can help guide you, help you understand what fair value is in the market, help you gather the information that someone like myself and our team are looking for, it can have tremendous value as you work through that process. I would encourage you, find someone that you trust, find someone that has good relationships, find someone who's experienced that really understands, again, the process and can talk you through it. And I think there is tremendous value there because for again, this is their first time doing it, and you don't want to leave value on the table, but you also want to.
Thank you for that. And I can't stress enough, aside from deal dynamics, relationship dynamics in any given deal is oftentimes one of the most important factors because, even though you're working on a deal, you're ultimately working with people, and being able to facilitate a smooth transaction can oftentimes mean, a closing or a not closing. So, at least speaking for ourselves, we have a solid relationship with both the buyers and our sellers, and any issues that arise, we're often able to smooth those things out. And just to recap and kind of just finalize here, we could just start down the line. Looking ahead for 2023, what are you guys expecting in terms of M&A, activity, so on and so forth? Start off with Peretz.
Okay. I think it was made very clear over here, when evaluating an agency, it's not just about how many patients they have. It's about how clean is their operations, what steps are they taking for caregiver retention, what steps are they taking for communication between the caregivers and the agency. So I think technology in 2023 will play a big role in that. And I think it's those agencies that use the technology to improve their operations will be more attractive for M&A.
I'll go next. So I think big picture, we're seeing really strong M&A activity. 2020, 2021 were real peaks of M&A activity. We're not seeing quite those levels, but I expect that we'll continue to see a lot of activity. Big picture, right? Not just New York, across the board. Debt markets are tighter. I think that puts some pressure on certain buyers and certain size deals. But I still think there's going to be a ton of activity. As I think about Up at Home and what we're looking to do in 23, I'm really excited that we've made this entrance into New York. We continue to be very excited about our ability to grow in this market. Continue to want to do that both organically and inorganically through M&A. So for us, really excited for opportunities to pursue that. I think you'll find that for Up at Home as a whole, that's not exclusive to New York. We're looking to do that across the board. And just continue to build. I think there's obviously market dynamics that are going on, things that are changing constantly, and New York is interesting from a regulatory standpoint. There's a lot to get your arms around. We see all of that creating opportunity for us and others as well. For me, it comes back to what we're trying to do at the end of the day. We're trying to build scale. We're trying to create that density. And really, we're all about the quality of care that we're providing to our clients. We're about supporting our caregivers, and we're about driving value for the broader healthcare system. And I think we have a ton of opportunities to do that, so I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think a lot's been said. I'll echo a lot of Matt's points. I hope they do a lot of deals. That's good for us, me selfishly. But I think we've seen with a lot of our clients both sell and buy, particularly on the sell side, some things are getting pushed into the first half of next year. So I think from what we're hearing, speaking to investment bankers and brokers, sellers, people have been a little tentative here in the second half of 22. But I think once things stabilize a little bit in Q1 of next year, we're going to see a lot of activity, not just in home care, but also broadly in the healthcare services space where we play. But certainly excited for what 23 holds, and hopefully there's a lot of transacting.
I think one way or another, we're going to eventually see a lot more transactions, particularly within this industry, whether it be 23 or 24. We're all familiar here with the LIPSA RFO process that's going to be coming out eventually. We see that the DOH is serious on moving forward in terms of the CDPAP RFO. So whether or not you guys are ready to sell, it's very possible that a lot of players are going to eventually get pushed out of the industry strictly by regulation. So we're highly fragmented in the home care space compared to some of the other healthcare sectors within New York, and that's eventually going to get consolidated one way or another. So guys, I appreciate you guys coming. Thank you so much. Hopefully that gave you some insight in terms of valuations and acquisitions, and gave you guys a ton of value. Thank you.
Thank you.